The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, 1893. Episode 4, The Stockbroker's Clerk. Welcome back, fellow detectives. After witnessing the heartwarming triumph of love over prejudice in the Yellow Face case, where a family's secret brought them closer together rather than tearing them apart, you might think you've seen how deception can sometimes protect rather than harm. But today's mystery plunges us back into the world of criminal cunning, where elaborate schemes and false identities are used not to shield loved ones, but to steal fortunes and destroy lives. Have you ever been offered an opportunity that seemed too good to be true, only to discover that it was the opening move in a game where you were never meant to be the winner? Prepare yourself for one of Holmes's most intricate financial mysteries, where government securities worth thousands of pounds disappear alongside the very man trusted to safeguard them. Picture yourself on a humid June morning in 1889, when the bustling energy of London's financial district masks the sophisticated criminal plots being hatched in its shadow. You're sitting in the comfortable chambers at 221B Baker Street with Holmes and Watson, when a young man arrives in a state of complete bewilderment, clutching a newspaper with trembling hands and wearing the haunted expression of someone whose entire world has been revealed as an elaborate lie. "Mr. Holmes," the visitor begins, his voice shaking with confusion and fear. "My name is Hall Pycroft, and until yesterday I believed I was the luckiest man in London. Now I fear I may be the biggest fool who ever lived, and possibly an unwitting accomplice to crimes I can't even begin to understand." Watson sets down his medical journal with immediate interest. "What has happened to transform good fortune into such distress, Mr. Pycroft?" But Holmes is already studying their client with that penetrating gaze that can read a person's entire history in their posture, clothing, and mannerisms. "Think about this situation, detective. What kind of good fortune could turn into a nightmare so quickly? In the competitive world of Victorian finance, what opportunities might be offered to lure an honest man into an elaborate trap? And why would criminals go to such lengths to manipulate someone of modest means and position?" Pycroft's story unfolds like a masterclass in criminal manipulation. 3 weeks ago, I was dismissed from my position as clerk at Coxon & Woodhouse, the stockbrokers in Draper's Gardens. After 5 years of faithful service, budget cuts forced them to reduce staff, and I found myself unemployed with nothing but a modest severance and excellent references. "I was walking home in despair," Pycroft continues, "when I was approached by a well-dressed gentleman who introduced himself as Arthur Pinner, representing the Franco-Midland Hardware Company. He'd heard of my reputation and offered me a position as manager of their new Birmingham branch at an extraordinary salary, £104 per year, nearly double what I'd been earning." Holmes leans forward with sharp interest. £104, a very specific figure. Did Mr. Pinner explain why such a generous offer was being made to someone they'd never employed before? This is where your detective skills become crucial. When criminals make offers that seem too generous, there's always a hidden cost that the victim doesn't yet understand. "That's what seemed almost too good to believe," Pycroft replies with growing agitation. "Pinner claimed they needed someone with impeccable character and proven reliability to establish their provincial operations. He said my references from Coxon & Woodhouse had impressed them so much that they were willing to pay premium wages for premium talent. The offer became even more attractive when Pinner sweetened the deal. He gave me an advance of £5 immediately, simply for accepting the position, and promised that my first quarter's salary would be paid in advance once I reported to Birmingham. I was to start immediately, taking the afternoon train and beginning my duties the very next morning." Watson exchanges a meaningful glance with Holmes. "Such haste seems unusual for establishing a new business operation. Did you have any doubts about the legitimacy of this opportunity, Mr. Pycroft?" But the young man's next revelation shows how skillfully criminals can exploit desperation and hope. "I was so grateful to escape unemployment that I didn't question the details carefully enough," Pycroft admits, with obvious self-recrimination. "Pinner's office was beautifully appointed, his clothing expensive, and he spoke with the confidence of a successful businessman. When someone offers salvation from financial ruin, you want to believe they're legitimate. But Holmes detects inconsistencies in this seemingly perfect opportunity. Tell me about this office where you met Mr. Pinner. What was the address, and what other businesses operated in the same building? Sometimes the most important clues lie not in what criminals show you, but in what they carefully avoid revealing. The office was in King William Street, in a building that housed several financial firms, Pycroft explains. Everything appeared perfectly respectable, though I noticed that Pinner seemed unfamiliar with some of the building's layout. When I asked about other Franco-Midland offices, he was oddly vague about their locations and operations. The story takes an even more disturbing turn when Pycroft describes his experience in Birmingham. When I arrived at the address I'd been given, I found a single room above a hardware shop, sparsely furnished with just a desk, 2 chairs, and a few ledgers. The supposed Franco-Midland Hardware Company consisted entirely of me, sitting alone in an empty office with no clear duties. Think about this setup, detective. Why would criminals go to such elaborate lengths to isolate their victim in a remote location with no real work to do? What advantage does this give them while they pursue their actual criminal objectives elsewhere? And how does it prevent their victim from discovering the truth? For 3 days, I sat in that empty office waiting for instructions, customers, or some indication of what my actual responsibilities were supposed to be. Pycroft continues with growing bewilderment. The only communication I received was a brief note from Pinner saying he was handling important business in London and would contact me soon with specific duties. Holmes's expression grows increasingly grave. Mr. Pycroft, you mentioned a newspaper that has caused you particular distress. What have you discovered that transforms your mysterious employment into something more sinister? The answer will reveal the true scope of the criminal conspiracy that Pycroft has unknowingly become part of. With trembling hands, Pycroft unfolds the morning paper and points to a shocking headline. Daring robbery at Mawson & Williams. Clerk disappears with government securities worth $10,000. The article describes how Edward Hall Pycroft, trusted employee of the prestigious stock brokerage firm, vanished along with a fortune in naval bonds and treasury notes. But that's impossible, Pycroft exclaims in horror. I've never worked for Mawson & Williams. Never had access to government securities, and certainly never stolen anything in my life. Yet here's my name in black and white, branded as a thief and fugitive from justice. How can I be accused of crimes I didn't commit in places I've never been? Watson looks up from the newspaper with professional concern. Holmes, if Mr. Pycroft has been in Birmingham for 3 days, he clearly couldn't have committed robbery in London. But why would criminals use his name and identity for such a sophisticated theft? The answer reveals the brilliant but ruthless nature of the conspiracy. Holmes's deduction unveils the criminal masterpiece. Mr. Pycroft, you've been the victim of an elaborate identity theft scheme. Someone has been impersonating you at Mawson & Williams, using forged references from Coxon and Woodhouse to gain employment and access to valuable securities. While you were isolated in Birmingham, unable to interfere or expose the deception, your doppelganger was preparing to execute a carefully planned robbery. The implications are terrifying. The real Edward Hall Pycroft is now a wanted man, accused of theft and embezzlement, while the actual criminal has disappeared with a fortune in government bonds. You've been set up to take the blame for crimes you never committed, and your isolation in Birmingham was designed to prevent you from establishing an alibi or discovering the truth until it was too late. But Holmes detects an even more sinister element in the plot. This scheme required detailed knowledge of your employment history, personal references, and professional qualifications. Someone has been studying your life with criminal intent, perhaps for weeks or months before approaching you with that seemingly generous job offer. The investigation leads you back to London, where Holmes examines the offices of both Coxon and Woodhouse and Mawson & Williams, searching for clues about how the criminals obtained such detailed information about Pycroft's background and credentials. What he discovers reveals a conspiracy more sophisticated than anyone imagined. Someone with access to employment records and reference letters has been systematically identifying targets for identity theft, Holmes explains with growing certainty. They look for recently dismissed employees with excellent reputations and detailed documentation, then use that information to create false identities for infiltrating other firms. Think about this method, detective. Why would criminals specifically target recently unemployed individuals with good references? How does unemployment make someone more vulnerable to manipulation? And what advantages does this give the conspirators in executing their financial crimes? The breakthrough comes when Holmes connects the Franco-Midland Hardware Company to a network of fraudulent businesses used to provide cover stories and false employment for criminal operations. Arthur Pinner doesn't exist, any more than the Franco-Midland Hardware Company exists. They're both elaborate fictional constructs created to manipulate victims and provide alibis for criminal activities. Holmes's investigation reveals that Arthur Pinner is actually Beddington, a notorious criminal who specializes in sophisticated financial frauds. His partner, who impersonated Pycroft at Mawson & Williams, is Hayward, an expert forger who can duplicate handwriting and create false documents with remarkable skill. These men have been operating this scheme across multiple cities, always targeting recently dismissed clerks with excellent references, Holmes explains. They isolate their victims in remote locations while using their identities to gain access to financial institutions and steal securities or cash. By the time the theft is discovered, the real victims are already branded as criminals, while the actual thieves have vanished. The chase leads you through London's financial district, where Holmes uses his network of street informants and professional contacts to track the movements of the two criminals. The investigation becomes a race against time. Can you apprehend Beddington and Hayward before they escape with their stolen fortune and leave Pycroft to face trial for their crimes? Holmes's deductive brilliance pays off when he realizes that criminals of this sophistication would have prepared multiple escape routes and false identities. They won't flee immediately. They'll wait until the initial investigation loses momentum, then disappear using entirely different identities. But first, they need to convert those stolen securities into cash, which requires specific criminal contacts. The confrontation takes place at a seedy gambling den in Whitechapel, where Beddington and Hayward are meeting with a fence who specializes in converting stolen securities into untraceable currency. When Holmes and the police surround the building, the criminals realize their elaborate scheme has been exposed and their freedom has come to an end. We planned this operation for 6 months, Beddington admits during his arrest. Studying employment records, identifying suitable targets, creating false businesses and identities. Pycroft was perfect, recently dismissed, excellent references, and desperate enough to accept any reasonable offer without asking too many questions. The resolution brings justice and redemption. The stolen securities are recovered, Beddington and Hayward face lengthy prison sentences, and Hall Pycroft's name is cleared of all criminal charges. More importantly, his reputation is restored, and several legitimate firms compete to offer him employment based on his proven integrity and the publicity surrounding the case. Holmes's final analysis reveals the broader implications of the scheme. This case demonstrates how criminals can exploit the vulnerabilities of honest people facing economic hardship. Unemployment, financial pressure, and the fear of destitution make even cautious individuals susceptible to offers that seem too good to be true. The investigation also highlights the sophisticated nature of modern financial crime. Gone are the days when criminals simply robbed banks at gunpoint. Today's thieves use forged documents, stolen identities, and psychological manipulation to steal fortunes while remaining invisible to their victims and law enforcement alike. Years later, Hall Pycroft would rise to become a successful manager at one of London's most prestigious financial firms. But he never forgot the lesson learned from his brush with criminal conspiracy. No legitimate opportunity requires you to accept employment without understanding the nature of your duties, and any offer that seems too generous usually has hidden costs that only become apparent after it's too late to escape. The case serves as a warning about the evolution of criminal methods. As society becomes more complex and interconnected, criminals adapt their techniques to exploit new vulnerabilities. The same systems that facilitate legitimate business can be turned into weapons against honest individuals who trust too readily or question too little. So tell me, detective, did you suspect that Pycroft was being set up as a scapegoat from the beginning? What does this case teach us about balancing desperation with caution when evaluating opportunities? And most importantly, how do we protect ourselves from criminals who use our own hopes and fears against us? This ingenious mystery reminds us that the most dangerous criminals are often those who appear most helpful, and that elaborate kindness can be a weapon more effective than any threat. The Franco-Midland Hardware Company that promised salvation delivered only betrayal. proving that not all traps are built with bars and locks. Holmes's methodical unraveling of this identity theft scheme demonstrates that even the most sophisticated criminal plots can be defeated by careful observation, logical deduction, and persistent investigation. The truth may be buried under layers of deception, but it always leaves traces for those skilled enough to find them. Join me next time as we investigate the Gloria Scott, a case that takes us back to Holmes's university days, where a young student's first encounter with criminal mystery sets the stage for a lifetime of detective work and reveals the origins of the great detective's legendary methods.